I understood. And then she hung up, no argument, no anger, just an abrupt ending, leaving an empty space in my chest. Later, Sarah confronted me. She called me cruel, said I couldn't just abandon Emma when she needed me. But it was never about money, it was about respect. I was there for her for over 20 years, Sarah, and when she had the chance to acknowledge that, she acted like it wasn't enough. I can't keep being her backup plan whenever things fall apart. Sarah didn't understand. To her, blood always came first, even when that blood was built on broken promises. The conversation ended in silence, but something between us shifted. An invisible wall formed where there had never been one before. Emma hasn't reached out since. After that call, Sarah told me Andrew was upset with me for abandoning Emma in a difficult moment. Apparently, Mark had, unsurprisingly, disappeared. No calls, no messages, nothing. I guess Emma was finally seeing the truth, but that didn't change what she had done or how she had made me feel. That night, alone in the living room, I replayed every moment I had been there for her, every time she had smiled and called me Dad. And I realized something. I had always believed that title was a choice, something earned, but now, I wondered if, to her, it had just been a convenient word, used when it suited her needs. I don't know if I can ever move past this, but one thing is certain this time, I won't be the one to keep giving, because honestly, I have nothing left to give. 3 months later, despite my efforts to keep my distance, the drama has a way of finding me. Sarah keeps trying to mend things between Emma and me, looking at me with that familiar mix of disappointment and pleading. She wants me to go back to being the man who never said no. But what she doesn't understand, what she refuses to accept, is that something inside me changed that day. I can't just pretend it didn't. Since the call where I refused to pay for Emma's honeymoon, our relationship has vanished. She hasn't reached out, and while that hurt at first, now it feels like relief. No more check-ins that were really just disguised requests for money. What did surprise me, though, was how quickly cracks formed in her marriage. Sarah, of course, kept in contact with Emma and casually brought it up over dinner one night. Emma and Andrew are struggling financially, she sighed dramatically. Andrew lost his job, and they're having trouble paying rent. I kept eating. I already knew where this was going. Sarah pressed on, don't you think we should help them? She's our daughter, after all. I set my fork down and took a deep breath. I'm not her father anymore, Sarah. According to Emma, that role belongs to Mark. If she needs help, she should ask him. Sarah looked at me like I had just said something unforgivable. How can you be so cold? She's always counted on you. You can't just turn your back on her now. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Cold is what she did to me at her wedding. Because honestly, that's exactly how it felt, like I had been erased. Like 20 years of love and sacrifice had meant nothing. If Mark is her father for the big moments, then he can be her father in the hard ones, too. That ended the conversation. Sarah stormed off, taking her plate to the sink. That night, we slept in silence, backs turned to each other. It hurt, knowing this was affecting my marriage, but I couldn't keep being the man who gave and gave, getting nothing in return. Despite everything, it didn't take long for Emma to reach out, though not directly. A week later, I got a message from Andrew. Hey, it's Andrew, Emma's husband. I need to talk to you about something important. Do you have time? I let the message sit there, unread but not unseen, a reminder of how much had changed. I already knew what he wanted. Money. It was always money. Eventually, I decided to hear him out, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to look him in the eye when I said no. We met at a small cafe. Andrew was already there, nervously tapping his foot, staring at an untouched coffee. I sat down without a word, waiting for him to speak first. Thanks for coming, he said finally, though there was no real gratitude in his voice, just expectation. I know things have been tense between you and Emma, but we're going through a tough time and thought maybe you could help. There it was, the inevitable request. I kept my expression neutral. What do you need? Andrew exhaled sharply. Emma and I have been struggling financially since the honeymoon. I lost my job, and now we're behind on rent. If we don't pay in 2 weeks, we'll be evicted. I nodded slowly, letting his words settle before asking the one question he clearly hadn't anticipated. Have you asked Mark? Andrew blinked, Confused. Mark, no, we haven't talked to him. Emma thought, well, that you might help. You've always been there for her. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only irony. Exactly, I said, leaning forward, and yet, when she had to choose, she picked Mark. So no, Andrew, I won't be helping this time. Maybe it's time for him to step up for once. Andrew tried to argue, tried to tell me it wasn't fair. That eviction wasn't just about Emma, but about him too. I held up a hand to stop him. This conversation is over, I said firmly. I wish you both the best, but I won't be solving your problems anymore. I stood, leaving him with his cold coffee and his desperation. When I got home, Sarah was waiting, like she already knew what had happened. I didn't give her the details. She didn't need them. She could tell by my expression that I had refused. Since then, Emma and Andrew have stopped reaching out. Sarah is still upset, though. She's stopped pushing me to give in, but I can feel the resentment lingering between us. Something tells me this isn't over. Because when a castle crumbles, there's always more debris to come. 6 months later, to be honest, these last few months have been liberating. I've stood firm in my decision, though it's meant living with Sarah's quiet disappointment. She doesn't say it outright, but I see it in her eyes. She still sees my choice as a betrayal. No matter how many times I explain that this isn't about money but about respect, she either can't understand or refuses to. But the distance from Emma has been freeing. For the first time in years, I'm no longer burdened with the weight of holding everything together. I've started focusing on myself, picked up woodworking again, reconnected with old friends, rediscovered parts of myself I had set aside for far too long. At first, I felt guilty. Now, I realize it was necessary. Still, the drama hasn't ended. A few weeks ago, Sarah told me Emma and Andrew were finally evicted. They couldn't gather enough money, and their landlord had run out of patience. Now, they're crammed into Andrew's mother's tiny apartment, barely enough space for 2 people, let alone a married couple. Sarah was furious. This wouldn't have happened if you had helped them, she snapped, her voice thick with blame. I didn't bother responding. Because deep down, I know I did the right thing. My stepdaughter chose her biological father over me until she needed money. I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for over 20 years. When we met, she was a single mother to a bright-eyed 5-year-old girl named Emma. I still remember the first time I saw her, chasing a paper airplane in the park while clutching Sarah's hand. Something about that moment told me they were my future. Sarah was always upfront about her past. Emma's biological father, Mark, had been unreliable, full of empty promises and fleeting appearances. He'd call on birthdays, drop off cheap gifts, and then disappear again. Despite this, Emma always got excited whenever he showed up. Sarah tried to manage her expectations, but the cycle repeated every time. When Sarah and I got serious, she made it clear that Emma was her priority. I accepted that without hesitation. What I didn't expect was how deeply I'd come to love her. It wasn't immediate, but over time, every "I love you, Dad," and every little drawing with my name spelled wrong won me over. I was there for everything, teaching her to ride a bike, holding her through fevers in the middle of the night, helping her practice for her first school recital. On the big day, she trembled behind the curtain but found my eyes in the crowd. I gave her a reassuring nod, and she smiled, gathering the courage to step forward. Mark, on the other hand, was just a shadow. He made big promises: next summer, I'll take you to the beach, or I'll get you that bike you wanted, but never followed through. Each time, Emma's heart broke a little more, and I was the one who picked up the pieces. Our bond only grew stronger over the years. I attended every school meeting, helped her pick out her graduation dress, and cheered her on at her games. She called me Dad, and though I wasn't her father by blood, I knew she meant it. That's why what happened next shattered me. When Emma went to college, I supported her without hesitation, paying for most of her tuition, books, and even the rent for her apartment. It was a financial sacrifice, but I didn't care. I wanted her to have the opportunities one never did. Mark remained as inconsistent as ever. He'd occasionally call to say, "Your dad is proud of you," but never contributed a cent to her education. When Emma graduated, she ran up to me after the ceremony, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad, for everything. I couldn't have done it without you." At that moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. So when she announced her wedding to Andrew, I was excited. I imagined walking her down the aisle, a moment symbolizing everything we had been through. I never said it out loud, but I assumed that honor would be mine. After all, I had been there for her every step of the way. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with joy. Emma talked about her dress, the flowers, the music. As always, I supported her, covering part of the reception, contributing to her dress, and paying for extra costs. I never expected anything in return except to be acknowledged as an important part of her day. Then the invitation arrived. I opened it with a smile, expecting to see my name in a special place. Instead, it was just a formal guest list. My name wasn't anywhere significant, and worse, Emma had chosen Mark to walk her down the aisle. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I asked her about it, her response hit me like a punch to the gut. There's only one biological father, and I've always wanted to give him this moment. Years of love, sacrifice, and devotion, dismissed in an instant. The worst part wasn't even her choice, it was how casually she said it, as if it had never even crossed her mind to choose me. Her wedding day was one of the most humiliating days of my life. I arrived early, dressed in a suit I had tailored for the occasion. I sat quietly among the guests and watched as all eyes were on Mark, escorting Emma down the aisle. During the speeches, I waited, hoping for even the smallest acknowledgement, but no one mentioned me. I was invisible. Something inside me broke that day. The part of me that had always been willing to sacrifice simply shut down. A week after the wedding, Emma and Andrew returned from their luxury honeymoon, beaches, candlelit dinners, breathtaking views. I didn't ask much about it. I couldn't bring myself to engage in conversations about something that had marked the breaking point of our relationship. Then Emma called. Her tone was light, as if nothing had happened. She gushed about the trip, the surprise dinner Andrew had planned under the stars. I listened in silence, responding with short answers. And then came the moment I should have seen coming. Dad, I need a favor. They had some unexpected expenses on the honeymoon and were short on cash. Could I help? For a moment, I was speechless. The way she asked, so casually, so assured, like she simply expected me to say yes, just as I always had. I was the one who fixed things, who provided, who sacrificed. But this time, something in me refused. I'm sorry, Emma, I said, keeping my voice steady. I can't help you this time. Silence. I could imagine the confusion on her face. But you've always helped before, she finally said, disbelief in her voice. I took a deep breath. Maybe you should ask Mark. He's your real father, isn't he? Maybe he can help. Another long silence, then a quiet, I understand, and she hung up. No argument, no anger, just an abrupt ending that left an empty space in my chest. Later, Sarah confronted me. She called me cruel, said I couldn't just abandon Emma when she needed me. But I told her it wasn't about money. I was there for her for over 20 years, Sarah, and when she had the chance to acknowledge that, she acted like it wasn't enough. I can't keep being her backup plan whenever things don't go her way. Sarah didn't understand. To her, blood always came first, even when that blood had done nothing but make empty promises. That night, alone in the living room, I replayed every moment I had been there for Emma, every time she had smiled and called me Dad, and I realized something. I had always believed that title was a choice, a recognition that I had earned my place in her life. But now, I wondered if it had just been a convenient word to her, something she said when it benefited her. I don't know if I'll ever move past this, but one thing is certain, I won't be the one to keep giving, because honestly, I don't think I have anything left to give. Update, 3 months since the wedding. Despite my efforts to keep my distance, drama keeps finding me. Sarah constantly tries to fix things between Emma and me, looking at me with that mix of disappointment and pleading. She expects me to go back to being the man who never said no. But she doesn't understand, something inside me changed that day. Since that phone call, Emma hasn't reached out. At first, it hurt, but now, it feels like relief. No more requests for money disguised as casual check-ins. What did surprise me, though, was how quickly problems started in her marriage. Sarah brought it up over dinner one night. Emma and Andrew are struggling financially. I just kept eating, because this time, It wasn't my problem to fix. I had spent years trying to fill the void Mark left in Emma's life. But now I wondered, had it all been for nothing? Maybe, to her, biology mattered more than love. Maybe I had never been competing with Mark's presence, but rather with the simple, undeniable fact of his existence. A week ago, Emma reached out to me for the first time in months. It wasn't about money, which surprised me. She wanted to meet, said she needed to talk. I hesitated before replying, torn between hope and skepticism. In the end, curiosity won. We met at the park we used to visit when she was little. She was already there, perched on a weathered bench, nervously fidgeting with her hands. When I approached, she stood up and gave me a hesitant hug, stiff, distant. I accepted it out of politeness rather than warmth. For a few minutes, we sat in awkward silence. Then she started talking, though not about why she had called me there. Instead, she vented about the struggles of living with Andrew's mother, the strain on her marriage, how much she missed having her own space. I listened without interrupting, sensing how much she needed to unload. Then, finally, she got to the real reason she had come. "Dad," she said, a word that once meant everything to me but now felt hollow. "I know I've disappointed you. I know the wedding hurt you, and I don't think I realized how much until it was too late." I didn't speak, just waited, letting her continue. Inside me, emotions churned, sadness, disbelief, a resentment I wished I could ignore. Emma took a deep breath before adding, "I just want to say I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel replaced." "But you did," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "And not just at the wedding. Every time you overlooked everything I did for you. Every time you chose to see Mark as something he wasn't. You say you never meant to replace me, but the truth is, I don't think I was ever in that place to begin with." Emma looked down, visibly shaken by my words. Maybe she had expected me to accept her apology without question, to pretend we could go back to what we once were. But some things, once broken, can't be mended. Our conversation ended soon after. As we said goodbye, she told me she hoped we could rebuild our relationship in time. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want that, but because I wasn't sure it was possible. Emma hadn't just broken my heart, she had shattered something deeper, my trust. I did something neither Sarah nor Emma will ever forgive me for, and honestly, I don't know if I even deserve their forgiveness. For the past year, since the wedding, my relationship with Sarah had crumbled beyond recognition. What began as emotional distance had widened into an impassable chasm. The love, the bond, even the respect we once shared, was gone. We still shared a house, but not a life. Since the wedding, there had been no intimacy. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a side effect of stress. But as the months passed, it became clear, Sarah wasn't just upset, she was resentful. She blamed me for Emma's suffering, and that resentment seeped into every corner of our marriage. The quiet evenings we once spent talking or watching movies turned into suffocating silence. Every time I reached for her, she pulled further away, brick by brick building a wall between us. And in the emptiness of that space, someone else entered my life, Sophie. Sarah's best friend. She had always been there, Emma's fun, extravagant aunt, the one with the big gifts and bigger stories. But after the wedding, something shifted. She started checking in on me more often. At first, I assumed she was trying to mend things between Sarah and me, but over time, I realized it was something else. Sophie listened, really listened. She told me what no one else had, that my feelings were valid, that I had been treated unfairly, that Sarah was pushing me away. She didn't see me as the villain in this story. I won't say it was planned, because it wasn't. It just happened, like a river carving a new path after a storm. One night, after another long conversation, we sat in silence, staring at each other. I had told her everything, how invisible I felt in my own home, how Sarah had turned cold, how I felt like I was losing myself. Then, out of nowhere, Sophie took my hand and said something that shattered my resolve. "You deserve to be happy, and they aren't letting you." I don't know what made me lean in, the way she said it, the way she looked at me, but the next thing I knew, I was kissing her, and she didn't pull away. That night, I didn't go home. I spent it with Sophie, talking, laughing, letting months of buried emotions surface. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, wanted. More than anything, I felt understood. I know what I did was wrong, but I don't regret it. Sophie was my escape, my refuge. I found in her what I had lost with Sarah, connection. Sarah suspects. She watches me when I come home late, when I step outside to answer messages. But she hasn't confronted me. Sophie struggles with guilt, too. Yet neither of us regret what we've done. I know this can't last. When Sarah finds out, there will be no coming back. But for now, at least, I don't feel so alone. 2 years have passed. Looking back, it all feels like a storm that has long since settled, leaving only its wreckage behind. I've rebuilt my life, though the scars remain. Sarah and Emma cut me out completely. In some ways, they freed me. When I finally confessed, Sarah reacted with a fury I hadn't anticipated. Before I could even speak, she demanded the truth. "What is this? I see the way you've changed. Just tell me." I blurted it out before I lost my nerve. "Sophie and we've been seeing each other. She was there for me when no one else was." Sarah's face twisted with rage. Then something worse, betrayal. So all of it? Everything we built meant nothing? I stood there, frozen. I had spent years trying to hold our family together, and yet I was the one who had ultimately destroyed it. "Sarah," I said, voice shaking, "while you were trying to save Emma, I lost myself, and you didn't even see it." She screamed, a sound so raw it ached. "What you've done is unforgivable. You've destroyed our family." Emma walked in then. She already knew. Her voice was cold. "I thought you were better than this." I wanted to defend myself, to explain, but the truth was, there was nothing left to say. I had made my choices, and they had made theirs. They told me to leave, to never come back. It hurt, but in a way, I felt relief. There was nothing left to fight for. Months later, I received a message from Emma. "Dad, I know I hurt you. I know I failed you. But you will always be my father. I'm sorry. I know things will never be the same, but I will always love you." I didn't reply right away. The wounds were still too raw. Maybe, one day, I'll find peace, but for now, all I can do is keep moving forward, no matter what I've left behind.